in the heights of towering mountains, where the sky meets the earth in complete stillness, there was a dark cave known as the Cave of the Sad Goblin. The walls of this cave reflected the pains of years and the harshness of fate that befell its owner, the old goblin, who lived in perpetual isolation, surrounded by clouds of melancholy and sorrow. The goblin was not only sad due to the loss of his wife, but also because that loss was the result of a great sorcerer's deeds, who had used her in dark magical acts. This sorcerer, with his wondrous powers, imprisoned the goblin's wife in a deep magical prison, surrounded by an unbreakable and insurmountable spell. The spell concealed her from the world, making it difficult for any creature, even jinn and goblins, to reach her. Despite the goblin's repeated attempts, he failed to break the spell or free his wife. His sorrow deepened when he learned that the spell could only be broken by the flower of eternity, which grows at the peak of a high mountain, the highest peak on earth. That peak was guarded by powerful ghouls, preventing any creature from reaching it, making the goblin's task nearly impossible. In this cave, which had become a symbol of sorrow and loss, the goblin's memories of his wife tormented his being, and the memory of the sorcerer's cruelty and his spell added to his deep pain. Thus, the cave was named the Cave of the Sad Goblin, where his painful memories and deep wounds became an inseparable part of this desolate place. Amidst this profound sorrow, the goblin had only a faint hope that one day an opportunity would arise to save his wife and regain his former happiness. While the goblin sat in his dark cave, immersed in his thoughts and deep sorrow, suddenly, the cries of a newborn pierced the stillness of the night. He gathered his strength and ventured out of the cave to discover the source of the sound. His search led him to the nest of the legendary roc, known for stealing precious things and taking them to its lair. Upon reaching the nest, the goblin found a beautiful baby girl, radiating light in the darkness like the moon. He carefully and lovingly cradled her in his arms, realizing that the legendary bird had taken her only because it saw something rare and valuable in her. The goblin was puzzled. How did this child end up here? He concluded that the roc must have taken her from a human family, as it was rumored to steal everything it found and bring it to its nest. He returned to his cave, holding the child tenderly, and decided to care for her as if she were his daughter. Over time, his dark heart began to open, and his life was painted with new colors of happiness and care. The goblin named the child Narcissus, and she grew up in the cave among nature and wild animals. Narcissus knew nothing of the human world and believed she belonged to the jinn like her goblin father. She wore clothes made from animal skins and lived her life in the simplest ways. However, she possessed an extraordinary beauty that surpassed what humans had seen. Years passed, and Narcissus grew into a stunning young woman, filling the cave with her vitality and beauty. She would stand at the edge of the cave at night, gazing at the stars and wondering about the vast world that stretched beyond the mountains. Reflecting on her life and moving forward with hope toward the unknown. Once upon a time, while Narcissus was wandering near the river, a handsome prince from a nearby kingdom was on a hunting trip with his soldiers. Across the river, he witnessed a breathtaking sight that astonished him. Narcissus, with her flowing black hair like threads of night, was joyfully playing with a small deer. The deer seemed to befriend her, while butterflies fluttered around her, as if in a world of magic and beauty. The scene was like an embodiment of a fairy tale, captivating the prince deeply with its charm. The prince approached her quietly, trying to gain her attention, but Narcissus felt startled at seeing a human for the first time in her life. She stepped back a little, hiding behind the deer, showing an unfamiliar fear. The prince tried to speak to her, but his language was incomprehensible to her. Narcissus spoke the ancient language of the fairies that her goblin father had taught her, and she communicated with animals in her own sounds, while the language of humans was a mysterious puzzle to her. The prince returned to his palace, caught in a daze from the beauty of that mysterious girl. He was left with feelings of curiosity and wonder, and he decided to return daily to the same spot, searching for Narcissus. His frequent visits deepened his admiration for her and increased his curiosity to uncover the secret of her life and origins. Every day he returned, yearning to discover more about the girl who had captivated him with her beauty and charm, feeling as if her magic had taken hold of his heart. As Narcissus settled onto the back of the white horse, she felt a strange and new sensation. It was not merely the fear she had felt before, but a deep and moving feeling, as if the prince's touches flowed through every part of her being, stirring unexpected tremors in her heart. The prince was not just a means of transporting her from one place to another. He was gentle in every movement, and his kind words filled the air around her. His hands touched her softly as he carried her, as if they were granting her warmth she had never known before. This care and tenderness gradually made her relax, allowing her to begin to feel a sense of stability and comfort. Although she did not fully understand the nature of this new feeling, Narcissus began to enjoy it, finding in it a substitute for the anxiety and fear that had accompanied her throughout her life. To her, the prince embodied compassion and concern, making her feel a sense of safety she had never experienced before. She started to take comfort in his presence and reclaim some of her lost tranquility. When Prince Narcissus arrived at his magnificent palace, Narcissus was nothing but in a state of shock and astonishment. She wandered through the palace as if she were in a strange world she had never seen before. Everything around her was completely different from what she was used to. The grand houses, the ornate clothing, the luxurious food she had never tasted, and the people speaking a language she could not understand. She viewed all these new things with wonder, unable to believe what her eyes were seeing. At first, it was difficult for her to adapt to the new life. She behaved as she had in the wild, eating and drinking in a manner reminiscent of the animals she was accustomed to in the cave, which astonished everyone around her. However, over time, Narcissus began to gradually adjust to the new environment, even though she missed her old world. As Narcissus dealt with this radical transformation in her life, the genie lived in a state of deep anxiety. Losing Narcissus left him feeling a great emptiness, and anger and fear began to dominate him. He did not know her fate and felt intense worry about what had happened to her. The genie decided to leave his sorrowful cave and embarked on a journey to search for Narcissus, overcoming his fear of the human world that he had avoided all his life. He was ready to face any danger or challenge, even if it meant stepping into a world he knew nothing about except that it was filled with strangeness and threats. In the palace of the great king, Princess Narcissus was taken to her private suite, where she was surrounded by all the comforts and luxuries she had never known before. However, Narcissus felt a sense of alienation and isolation in this new world, as she knew nothing about human life and its rules. The prince, who could not forget Narcissus's beauty and charm, felt something deeper for her. He watched her as she gradually learned how to adapt to her new life, feeling an overwhelming desire to protect and guide her. Yet, there was an obstacle in his way. The king, the prince's father, was not pleased with Narcissus's condition. He wanted to ensure that she was capable of being a wife worthy of the crown prince, not just a beautiful girl who was primitive. The king summoned the prince to his council and said to him seriously, "My son, this girl may be beautiful and enchanting, but she must learn how to be a true human being. If you truly intend to marry her, you must tame her and teach her the ways of human life. The wife of the crown prince cannot simply be a primitive girl who knows nothing about palace life and its etiquette. The prince understood that the matter was not easy, but he was determined to make Narcissus the lady he could be proud of in front of everyone. He began organizing a special educational program for her, bringing in the best teachers and servants to help her learn everything she needed. The teachers started teaching Narcissus the language and how to speak in a manner befitting the nobles of the court. They taught her how to sit at the table and how to eat with grace and politeness, she who was used to eating with her hands directly from nature. She also began to learn about history, customs, and traditions, and how to behave at social events. At first, Narcissus found these lessons difficult and confusing. She did not understand why she had to change herself in this way. But over time, she began to realize that this human world had its laws and norms, and that if she wanted to stay in it, she had to adapt. During this period, the prince watched her progress with pride and admiration. Every day, he saw a new change in her, and he felt his heart growing fonder of her. He spent time with her at night, discussing everything she had learned, and explaining to her what was difficult for her to understand. He always tried to be kind and patient with her, which made Narcissus feel reassured and confident in his presence. As the days passed, Narcissus began to transform from a wild girl into an elegant and refined lady. But deep down, she wondered if she was giving up a part of herself in this process. Sometimes she felt sadness for her previous life in the cave, where she was free and lived naturally. But the love that began to grow in her heart for the prince pushed her to continue this transformation. At the same time, the jinn roamed the mountains and valleys in search of Narcissus. His heart burned with anger and worry, vowing that he would not rest until he found her and brought her back to the cave, to the normal life she once knew. He knew that the human world could be harsh and unjust, and he feared that Narcissus might have suffered harm or oppression. Thus, events intertwined as both the prince and the jinn tried to find a way to save Narcissus from the fate each believed was best for her. Months passed of education and training, and Narcissus transformed from that wild girl who knew nothing of human life into a stunning woman radiating beauty and elegance. She now sat confidently in royal gatherings, speaking appropriately and behaving with a grace that reflected her new education and upbringing. Everyone in the palace began to look at her with admiration and respect, to the point that they completely forgot she was once just a wild girl who knew nothing of civilization. One day, while Narcissus was sitting in the palace garden, enjoying the golden rays of the sun illuminating the flowers around her, the prince approached her. He sat beside her, took her hands in his, and looked deeply into her eyes. His eyes sparkled with emotion and sincerity, and he could not hide what was in his heart. He said to her softly, "Narcissus, every day you grow more and more in my eyes. I have seen in you something I have not seen in any other woman. I have seen a pure soul and a brave heart. You have learned so much, and you have transformed into a stunning woman worthy of being a queen. I cannot wait any longer. I want you to be my wife, my partner in life, and the queen of this land." Narcissus looked at him in astonishment and mixed happiness. She did not expect this day to come so quickly, but she knew deep in her heart that she felt something similar towards him. She loved him too, in her simple and pure way, but she still felt strange in this new world. Before she could respond, the prince leaned closer and said in a tender voice, "Narcissus, you have been a gift from heaven to me. I will not be happy unless you are by my side forever. Will you accept to be my wife?" That moment was pivotal in Narcissus' life. She felt warmth flooding her heart, and she felt something urging her to accept. She looked into the prince's eyes and saw sincerity and devotion in them, so she nodded her head and said softly, "Yes, I accept." The news of the engagement between the prince and Narcissus spread throughout the kingdom. Celebrations were held, and the palace was adorned with flowers and lights. Everyone was eagerly awaiting the wedding day to see how Narcissus, the girl who had lived in the wilderness, would become the queen of the kingdom. Meanwhile, the ogre had overcome the deep sorrow that engulfed him after losing Narcissus. As time passed, his heart remained occupied with thoughts of her, filled with worry about what might have happened to her. He could not forget her childlike beauty and charm, and he always wondered about her fate. Suddenly, upon hearing from some kind spirits who were aware of human events, he learned of Narcissus' engagement to the prince. The news of the engagement spread like wildfire among magical beings, and the ogre heard it while he was in one of the ancient forests. The news was a violent shock to him. His being trembled, and his heart filled with despair and anger. The thought that Narcissus had become part of the human world, especially as the wife of a prince, was a shock beyond his endurance. He understood that the girl he had cared for and taught about life was now tied to a future he did not possess, and a threat to her natural future. The ogre vowed to himself that he would not rest until he reclaimed Narcissus. He knew that the road to the palace would be filled with challenges, for he understood that humans, including the prince, were merciless in dealing with their enemies or intruders. But his heart was filled with strong determination, and he decided to face any danger or obstacle in his way, no matter the cost. And so the ogre began preparing for his departure. He gathered his strength and magic, and went to the nearest place he knew to learn the latest news about Narcissus and devise a plan to retrieve her. He was ready to confront anyone who stood in his way, and he was determined to march to the palace and achieve his goal, no matter what it took. He did not know how he would face the prince or what he would do if he encountered him, but he was prepared to give everything he had to bring Narcissus back to her rightful place, where her natural life was among the embrace of nature and magic. The genie flew with Narcissus through the dark sky, anger burning in his chest. Narcissus cried in his arms, pleading with him to listen, but she knew that the rage filling his heart would not allow him to hear her. Sadness weighed heavily on her heart, for she was fully aware that the one who had saved and raised her was now the one who held her captive, while she found herself in love with the prince who had given her a new experience in life. The genie reached his cave high in the mountains and gently placed Narcissus on the ground. Narcissus looked around, feeling a mix of nostalgia and fear. This was the place where she had grown up, but now it felt like a prison. In an angry voice, the genie said, "Narcissus, you belong to me. I am the one who saved you, and I am the one who gave you life. How can you now leave all this for a human?" Narcissus looked at the genie with tearful eyes and said, "Father, I have never forgotten you, and I know you saved and raised me. You were everything to me, but now I have become part of another world, the world of humans. I have learned so much from them, and I truly love the prince. But that does not mean I do not love you. You will always be a part of my life." But the genie could not comprehend her words, as he was overwhelmed with anger and jealousy. He decided to imprison Narcissus in the cave until she renounced her love for the prince and returned to be as she once was. While Narcissus was imprisoned in the cave, she remembered every moment spent with the prince, every lesson learned, and every feeling of love she had developed for him. She felt torn between her love for the genie as a father and her love for the prince as a life partner. In the meantime, the prince was suffering from the pain of separation from Narcissus. He knew that the genie and cunning had taken her, and he was determined to get her back at any cost. The prince decided to go to the mountains himself, to confront the genie and try to reclaim Narcissus. Would the prince be able to convince the genie to let Narcissus go? And how would this confrontation between the prince and the genie end? The prince arrived at the high mountains, where the genie resided in his deep cave. He stood at the foot of the mountain and began shouting, challenging the genie with a voice filled with anger and determination. "Oh, you demon, come out and face me. I am here to reclaim Narcissus, and I will not return without her." Narcissus heard the prince's voice echoing through the cave, and her heart filled with pain and fear. She rushed to her father, the genie, pleading with tears. "Father, please, do not harm him. Let me talk to him. Perhaps we can find a solution." The genie looked at Narcissus, her extraordinary tears filling her eyes, feeling an internal struggle. He had never seen Narcissus in such a state before, and he began to feel that her love for the prince was not just an illusion, but he was determined to put the prince to a difficult test. The genie remembered the flower of immortality, which only grows at the highest peak on earth, guarded by tribes of powerful ghouls. The genie emerged from his cave and stood before the prince, who was challenging the mountains with his shouts. The genie looked at him sharply and said, "If you truly want Narcissus, you must prove that you deserve her. I will put you before a very difficult challenge." Narcissus's dowry is the flower of immortality, a rare flower that only grows at the highest peak on earth. The peak is guarded by powerful and dangerous ghouls that no one dares to approach. "If you bring me this flower, you will win her heart. If you fail, you will not return and will never see the light of the sun again." The prince fell silent for a moment and then said confidently, "I am ready for any challenge for Narcissus, for my love for her is greater than anything else." The challenge seemed impossible. The mountain was rugged and the ascent fraught with dangers, yet the prince did not hesitate for a moment. He began his journey to the mountain's peak, each step increasing his determination to succeed. His love for Narcissus was what fueled him with the strength and courage to face this arduous challenge. Hours and days passed, with the prince battling against all odds, until he finally reached the coveted flower. The ghouls guarded the flower with unparalleled ferocity, but nothing could deter the prince. With skill and bravery, he fought a fierce battle against the ghouls, defending himself with all the strength and resolve he possessed. After a tremendous effort and a long struggle, he managed to defeat them and take the flower of immortality. The prince returned to the genie, carrying the precious flower, exhaustion filling his body. When the genie saw the prince holding the flower of immortality, he was struck with astonishment. How could a human prince achieve what he had failed to accomplish for thousands of years? The genie had no choice but to acknowledge the power of the prince's love for Narcissus and the prince's bravery. The genie said with admiration, "You have succeeded in the challenge, and you have proven that your love for Narcissus is stronger than anything else. The flower of immortality that I could not possess for 1,000 years. You brought it simply because you loved it sincerely. Therefore, you deserve to be with her." Then the genie turned to Narcissus and said, "Listen to what the prince will say, for he deserves to be with you. I will tell you the story of the flower." The genie took Narcissus and the prince to a special place, where he narrated the tale of the flower of immortality and how it was tied to an ancient pact that required great sacrifices to obtain it. With the help of the genie, his wife, who had been trapped by an old spell, was freed, bringing the genie a sense of comfort and peace. With the genie's consent, the prince gained the right to marry Narcissus. The decision was painful for the genie, but he knew deep in his heart that Narcissus would be happy with the prince. Nevertheless, the genie wished the prince and Narcissus a life filled with love and happiness, and he gave his blessing for the marriage, knowing that Narcissus would find the happiness she deserved. Thus, the prince and Narcissus returned to the palace, where love and mutual respect had grown stronger than ever. At the wedding of Narcissus and the prince, which was considered the grandest and most extravagant in the history of the wilderness, Kings from all over the world gathered, along with jinn and humans, to witness this legendary event. The hall was beautifully decorated with vibrant colors and sparkling lights, and the beautiful bride appeared in her shimmering gown, a sight that captivated all. In the midst of the dazzling celebrations, all eyes suddenly turned to the hysterical screams coming from the wife of the king of the southern kingdom. She was screaming and crying, saying, "My daughter! My daughter!" Narcissus became confused and terrified as guests began to gather around her, trying to understand what was happening. The prince rushed to Narcissus's side, shocked to notice the complete resemblance between her and the Southern Queen. It seemed as if Narcissus was a miniature version of her, with the same facial features and hair and eye color. The truths began to unfold gradually, revealing that Narcissus was the infant kidnapped by the legendary rock bird from the royal family years ago. During the ceremony, Narcissus recounted her entire story, detailing her upbringing in the genie's cave and how he raised her as his daughter. These details confirmed that Narcissus had been missing from a royal family for a long time. Thus, it became clear that she was the legitimate daughter of the royal couple who had been lost for years. The celebration turned into a moment filled with tension and joy at the same time, as Narcissus returned to her true family. With the conclusion of this thrilling revelation, the festivities continued, as joy spread among the attendees who blessed the marriage of Narcissus and the prince, celebrating this fortunate return.